The debt had taken everything from her, but no one felt her loss the way she did. People in the small town below spoke her name like an insult, as if she carried a sickness they feared would spread. Emma Parker was a widow, yet no one showed her respect or sympathy. Instead of comfort, she received blame. Her late husband had wasted all their money, and his family treated her as if she had been the cause of his downfall. She lived like a shadow among them, unseen and unwanted. One cold morning, her father-in-law grabbed her by the arm and dragged her out of the small, dark room she had been forced to live in since the funeral. His 2 sons walked beside him, both wearing the same cruel smirk. They did not say a single kind word as they pulled her through the muddy streets and toward the mountain that rose like a jagged knife against the gray sky. Each step up that path felt like she was walking away from the last piece of her life. They were taking her to the man who lived on the mountain. People in town whispered many stories about him. Some said he had been a soldier who walked away from a war and never looked back. Others believed he had killed a man and escaped into the wilderness. All agreed on one thing: he was not someone to meet by choice. He lived alone, far from town, more like a part of the mountain than a man. Emma soon learned the truth of why she was being taken to him. Her father-in-law had struck a deal. In exchange for clearing the final debt her husband had left behind, Emma would spend 1 year serving the mountain man. Cooking, cleaning, and living in silence, she was no longer seen as a person. She was being traded like a sack of flour. The air grew colder as they climbed. Emma's thin shawl did little to protect her from the biting wind. The town faded behind them, becoming nothing more than a small gray memory. At last, they reached a quiet clearing. A cabin stood alone among the tall trees, strong and still, as if it had grown straight out of the earth. Smoke curled from the chimney, a thin sign of life. On the porch stood the man she had been traded to. He leaned on an axe, as if it were just an extension of his arm. He was tall, with strong shoulders and a dark beard. His eyes were cold and clear like frozen water. He watched them without saying a word, not showing anger or surprise. He simply waited. Her father-in-law pushed her forward. "A year," he said. "As we agreed." The mountain man looked at Emma in a way that made her feel small. It wasn't a cruel look or a hateful one. It was as if he was judging her, like someone would judge a tool, wondering if she would break easily. After a quiet moment, he gave one sharp nod. That was the end of the deal. Her husband's family turned away from her and left without a backward glance. Their boots crunched through the snow until the sound disappeared into the cold air. Emma stood alone at the edge of her new life, feeling the weight of the silence wrap around her. The man went inside the cabin, leaving the door slightly open. Warm, golden light shone through the small gap, calling her inside, but she could not move. She was too afraid to enter, too scared to step into a new prison. She sat on the cold porch steps and pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders. Night slipped over the mountain like a heavy blanket, and the cold settled into her bones. She didn't hear him return. A heavy weight landed across her shoulders, warm and soft. It was a large wolf fur blanket. On the step beside her sat a wooden bowl filled with steaming stew. The smell made her heart ache. She looked around, but he had already slipped back inside. She told herself it wasn't kindness, only practicality. A servant who froze could not work. Still, the warmth filled her body and brought tears to her eyes she would not allow to fall. Days passed, each one quiet and heavy. The sun would rise, and the man would already be gone, leaving a neat stack of firewood by the door. Emma would cook, clean, and try to make the cabin feel less empty. She scrubbed the floors and washed the few dishes. She cooked simple meals from dried beans, salted meat, and root vegetables. The mountain man barely spoke. She would hear the sharp sound of his axe in the distance or see him walking through the trees with a rifle across his back. Emma noticed wolves near the cabin, watching from the edge of the woods. A large silver wolf seemed to be the leader. At first she feared them, but they did not attack or growl. They seemed to belong to the man, just like the silence did. Each night, she sat by the fire alone, wondering who this man really was and why fate had brought her here. She did not know it yet, but the mountain would soon change her life in ways she never imagined. Emma had been on the mountain for a little over a week when her body finally gave out. The long days of work, the cold that seemed to sit inside her bones, and the fear that never truly left her heart all came crashing down at once. She had been standing near the table when the room spun around her. The floor rushed up fast, and everything went dark. When Emma opened her eyes, she felt warm, truly warm. Not the kind of warmth that faded quickly, but a deep, steady heat that wrapped around her like a safe embrace. She blinked and saw that she was no longer on the cold floor. She lay in his bed, covered in thick furs, near a strong fire that filled the cabin with a comforting glow. The mountain man sat across the room, sharpening a knife slowly, the soft scrape of stone the only sound. He did not look at her, but she could feel his awareness of her. She tried to sit up, guilt and fear rushing through her at the thought of resting when she should be working. Stay. His voice was low and rough, like a man who had not spoken much for a very long time. It was the first word he had ever spoken to her. It shocked her still. She froze. Her heart beat fast. He didn't raise his eyes, but his voice came again, steady as stone. "You were cold." He spoke as if that explained everything. He spoke as if it mattered. Emma sank back into the blankets. No one had cared if she was cold for a long time. She didn't know how to respond to even a small measure of concern. She stared at the fire, letting the warmth settle under her skin. For the first time in months, her hands did not shake. From that moment, small changes began to appear. He never talked much, but his silence no longer felt like a wall meant to keep her out. It felt like a quiet place where two tired souls could rest without pressure or fear. Without words, he showed her care. Each morning, Emma found a tin cup of coffee waiting for her near the hearth. Bitter and strong, but warm. Something left for her, not ordered or demanded. One evening, he noticed her struggling to sew a torn sleeve on her dress with a dull needle. The next morning, she found a small sewing kit on the table. Sharp needles. Strong thread. No note. No explanation. Just something she needed. Quietly provided. He spent his evenings carving small animals out of wood. Emma watched him sometimes, amazed at how such large, strong hands could be so gentle and patient. A hawk, a fox, a bear with raised paws, all carved with loving detail. One afternoon, after returning from gathering water, she found a tiny wooden bird on her pillow. Its wings folded, its head tilted like it was listening to a song only it could hear. It was beautiful. There was no reason for him to make it, no use for it. It was simply a gift. Emma closed her fingers around it and tried not to cry. A few days later, something happened that took her breath away. Emma had been leaving small scraps of food for the wolves near the forest line, trying to show she meant no harm. One day, the great silver wolf came close. Slowly, cautiously, it nudged its cold nose into her hand. She held her breath. She could feel its trust. When she glanced toward the woodpile, she saw the mountain man watching. He didn't smile, but he gave one small nod. A nod that said she had earned her place among the living things of his mountain. But peace never lasts forever. Shadows from the past always find a way to creep back in. One night, the nightmares returned, and Emma woke with a frightened gasp. Her chest felt tight, panic gripping her heart. She stayed silent, ashamed, but she knew he heard her. He didn't speak or move, yet somehow, she felt less alone in the darkness. The next day, while mending one of his shirts, she noticed the scars on his back when he turned away. They crossed his skin like a cruel map of pain. Long, deep, and old. Scars that showed a history of violence she could not imagine. For a moment, their eyes met. He saw her seeing him. The small bridge between them trembled. He pulled on a clean shirt without a word, shutting himself off again. The silence returned, heavier this time. But now Emma understood something she had not seen before. She was not the only one carrying wounds. He carried storms behind his quiet eyes, too. Instead of falling back into fear, Emma began to find small ways to bring warmth into the cabin. She hummed softly while she worked, She braided her hair again each morning. She placed wildflowers in a little jar on the table, adding a bit of color to the room. She cooked meals with more care than before. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And slowly the cabin began to feel less like a prison and more like a home. A traveling trapper stopped by one evening, sharing a meal with them as a courtesy of wilderness life. His news chilled the room. He said Emma's father-in-law and the town sheriff were planning to come up the mountain. They were spreading lies, saying the mountain man had kidnapped her. They wanted her back under their control. When the trapper left the next morning, the air in the cabin changed. The peace was gone. The mountain man's quiet turned into a different kind of silence. A sharp one. A dangerous one. He prepared without speaking. He cleaned his rifle, sharpened his axe, and walked the land around the cabin for hours. He was not the lonely man she had first met. He looked like a soldier ready for battle. That night, he finally spoke to her again. "When they come, you go to the root cellar. Bolt the door. Do not come out, no matter what you hear." The Emma who arrived on the mountain would have obeyed, but she was no longer that woman. "No," she said softly, but firmly. The fight ahead did not scare her. The thought of losing this home did. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. Her voice did not shake. The mountain man looked at her with surprise, as if he was seeing her for the first time, not as someone who needed protection, but as someone willing to stand beside him. She walked to the window and pointed toward the far side of the valley. "They will come from the south ridge. It is the easiest path. They are lazy men and expect no resistance," she said. "But there is a narrow game trail behind the ridge. If you take it, you can come up behind them. They won't see you." He studied her for a long moment. Her words were steady and sure. She was not the weak, frightened woman who had been dragged up the mountain. She was different now, stronger. He gave a short, firm nod. They weren't simply defending him anymore. They were protecting what they shared. The next day was tense and quiet. Emma felt the mountain holding its breath. The wolves paced at the tree line, alert and restless. The sun climbed slowly, and everything felt too still. Then she heard them, the crunch of hooves on hard snow. Harsh voices carried through the cold air. 3 riders reached the south ridge. The sheriff, round-bellied and red-faced, rode between her 2 brothers-in-law. They wore cruel smiles, full of confidence. They believed this mountain belonged to them for the taking. Before they reached the clearing, the traps he had set came alive. The sheriff's horse stumbled in a snare and threw him into the snow. One brother's horse was spooked by loose rocks that tumbled down a slope, and he fell hard. The other brother stepped into a loop trap on the ground that yanked his feet out from under him. They cursed, confused, and angry. Then he appeared. The mountain man moved through the trees like part of the wind. He didn't fire a gun. He didn't need to. He struck fast, with skill and purpose. A sharp blow to one man's shoulder, a twist that knocked the sheriff's weapon away, and a quick move that sent the last brother crashing into the snow. It was over almost as soon as it began. But a 4th rider emerged. Her father-in-law had stayed behind, confident the others would drag her back. When he saw them defeated, rage twisted his face. He pointed at Emma as she stepped out of the cabin. "Witch!" he shouted. "You did this! Come here! You belong to me!" Emma walked down the steps calmly, coming to stand beside the mountain man. She looked her father-in-law in the eye. Her voice was calm and clear. "I am not your property." She pulled down the collar of her dress just enough to show the faded yellow mark on her skin and a small scar. "This is what your family called duty," she said. "This is the honor you claimed. You hurt me and called it debt." The sheriff, now standing beside his horse, saw the truth in her eyes and the signs on her skin. He saw the protective stance of the man beside her. He saw the wolves watching from the trees. He understood the lie he had been paid to support. The mountain man finally spoke, his voice low and filled with old pain. "I had a wife once," he said. "Had a daughter. Men like you burned my home and took everything because they thought they owned it." Emma's heart stopped for a moment. The scars on his back suddenly made sense. "You will not take anything from this mountain again," he said. His words were not loud, but they were final. Shame hit her father-in-law harder than any fist. The sheriff grabbed his arm and whispered, "It's over." Together, broken and silent, they left the mountain and never returned. As their figures disappeared below the ridge, a new kind of silence settled over the clearing. It was peaceful, safe, the kind of quiet that came after a storm finally passed. That evening, Emma and the mountain man sat by the fire. The dancing flames lit his face, and for the first time he looked less alone. He looked at her and said, "The year is almost over." His voice held no threat, only truth. Emma took a deep breath. "This is my home now," she said. Not a request, a promise. He stood, walked to a small, carved wooden box, and opened it. He returned to her and knelt down. In his hand was a simple silver ring, old but cared for. He held it out, letting her choose. Emma slid it onto her finger. It fit as if it had been waiting for her. Then he picked up a dark blue ribbon from her sewing basket. With a care that softened her heart, he braided it into her hair, not as ownership, but as a quiet, gentle vow. A year later, the cabin had changed. A small porch stood in front. A garden grew strong under Emma's hands. She hummed while she cooked, her hair braided with that same ribbon. The mountain man taught her how to track animals and read the land. He spoke more now, but still with few words, each one meaningful. The silver wolf lay nearby, watching over their home like a loyal guardian. They didn't need grand speeches or promises. A touch of his hand as he passed behind her, a carved flower left on her pillow, the warmth of his coat placed over her shoulders when evenings grew cold. These were their words. Their love. Emma often thought about the woman who had climbed the mountain in fear. She had expected a prison and found a life. She had expected a master and found a partner. Love didn't arrive loudly. It grew slowly, like a fire built with care, burning warm enough to survive the longest winter. And on that mountain, with the man who had once been a stranger, Emma found everything she had ever needed.